Hi, I'm Davy. I'm awesome. Welcome to Davy's Awesome Wrestling, where I review wrestling-related things all from the perspective of a fan, not an insider. This week I'm finally reviewing a documentary that came out in 2018 on Peacock, simply titled Bruno. The story of one of the most legendary figures ever to appear in wrestling, Bruno Sammartino. It's a short documentary, it's only 46 minutes long, that basically just gives you the basics. It starts with his upbringing in Pisa Ferrato, Italy. I probably said that wrong. In fact, I'm almost certain I said that wrong. A small town that eventually got occupied by the Nazis during World War II. And to survive, him and his family, in the middle of the night, had to run out of their home and go to a mountain that took about a day's worth of hiking to get to the top to, and they had to basically live up there to get just enough food to survive. Their mom would occasionally have to sneak down the mountain, back into their home, get some food, take it up there, and they would have to make it last as long as they could. But it was a 2-day trip until eventually the Nazis made their way up there and were going to be executed. But there were some Italians that were able to fight them off, and then eventually World War II ended, and a couple years later they made their way to America, where Bruno's father already was, working in the steel mills. But Bruno, being a skinny, sickly child, not to mention one of the few Italian families at the time living in Pittsburgh, but going into his now childhood, he's a skinny little Italian kid, getting picked on in school, being bullied, but being kind of weak, until one of his Jewish friends invites him over to their little youth center thing where he begins weightlifting, even though he's not very strong, but gets stronger and stronger, gets into high school wrestling, gets to the point that he's like 275 pounds, lifting several hundred pounds, a bodybuilder, and becoming a bit of a local celebrity, being a weightlifter, to the point that it catches the attention of one of the agents at Capitol Wrestling, which later became the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, which later became the WWF, which later became WWE. And around the time that Capitol Wrestling was breaking off from the NWA, they crowned their own world champion, Buddy Rogers, but he's kind of at the end of his career. So it goes into the story of this kid that wrestled a little bit for us and then went up to Toronto, where wrestling wasn't very popular, but then started making it popular. People started gravitating to him for some reason. They want him to come and be their champion. But Buddy Rogers, not being a very reliable kind of guy at the time, the egotistical, I do what I want kind of guy, they had to lie to Buddy Rogers and say that this guy is going to lose to you. Then during the match, Bruno had to basically shoot on him, put him up in a Canadian backbreaker and said, "Give up or I'm going to break your back." Thus starting one of, if not the most iconic championship legacy that there has ever been, as Bruno Sammartino won the, at the time, Capitol Wrestling, but would soon transition into the Worldwide Wrestling Federation World Championship in Madison Square Garden. But then it went into him basically wrestling all over the country for about 7 years, because that's how long his championship reign was. About 7 years. Almost 8. This was back when events were only like once every month. The champion wasn't necessarily defending his title every time. Not to mention they weren't on weekly shows all over the country. So people didn't get bored as much, because most people kept up with wrestling by reading the papers and the dirt sheets and whatnot. But after 7 years, he's just feeling like he needed a break. His body was starting to break down, going place to place to place, making appearances. So they talked about the night that he dropped the title to Ivan Koloff. Apparently, as soon as Ivan Koloff got the pin, the arena went so quiet that Ivan Koloff had landed a knee from the top rope onto Bruno Sammartino, hitting him in the neck, not doing any damage, but Bruno thought, did he just turn me deaf? Until Arnold Skolin came up to him and asked, "Are you alright?" He was like, "Well, I heard him, so I must not be deaf." And had Ivan Koloff and everybody who was in the arena at that time talking about how insanely quiet it was, that you could seriously hear a pin drop. Everybody was so shocked that Bruno Sammartino had lost the title. And it made Bruno Sammartino a little bit depressed, because he's like, I didn't want to make my fans that sad, but on the same token he was happy because he got to go spend a few months with his family. And you gotta remember, this again back in the territory days, when the champion went from territory to territory to territory, wrestling every day of the week, twice on Sundays. They did not get a lot of days off. But then working something out with Vince McMahon Sr., because attendance was just down everywhere outside of New York, even though at that point Ivan Koloff had dropped the title, Pedro Morales was just not drawing as well as Bruno Sammartino. Still doing okay, but business was down. So made a deal with Bruno Sammartino to come back, win the title again, and be the champion for just another year. So he did. He came back. Pedro Morales had just recently dropped the title to Stan Stasiak. Bruno beat him for the title, and 1 year turned into 4. And so when it all came ahead, he had a match with Stan Hansen, who accidentally, in a body slam, dropped him on his head and broke his neck. After that, he did have surgery. He recovered, but he just wasn't 100% anymore. He wasn't wrestling the way he wanted to wrestle. Not to mention, just all the years, all the grind, his body was starting to wear down. So he dropped the title for the last time to Superstar Billy Graham, which was a monumental title win, not just because it was Superstar Billy Graham's only title reign, but that was the very first time that the world title had changed hands on a screw job. And then him going out in a blaze of glory, selling out Shea Stadium in a cage match against Larry Zbyszko, which to this day is Larry Zbyszko's biggest moment in wrestling. But then here's the part of the documentary where I kind of got disappointed, because they very, very quickly glossed over him leaving WWE. They basically just said, as time was going on in the 80s, he was still affiliated with the WWE. We all remember WrestleMania 1, him being there with his son David. He was part of the broadcast team. But as Vince McMahon Jr. was taking over, and it was going more and more to be in sports entertainment, and it was getting less and less family friendly, Bruno wasn't liking it, so he left. But then it basically goes into how from 1988 till 2013, he was completely estranged from WWE until Triple H came in and really wanted to induct him into the Hall of Fame, because they were hosting WrestleMania that year from New Jersey, New York, I guess on the border. And they were doing the Hall of Fame from Madison Square Garden. What better than Bruno Sammartino, who had been absent from the Hall of Fame for so long because he never wanted to be inducted. So Triple H reached out to Bruno Sammartino, basically told him, hey, you should look at our product now. It's a lot more family friendly. You might like it. Bruno did, and finally accepted being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Was even inducted by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was a big fan of Bruno's. He was a big fan of Bruno's. Arnold being a big fan of wrestling, of course. So it ended on a feel-good note. Then, of course, ended with the rest in peace thing. Because, yes, rest in peace, Bruno Sammartino. He died right before this documentary came out. But again, whereas this was a good documentary, it was lacking. Because, like I talked about, in like 5-10 minutes, they completely bypassed the entire thing about him leaving WWE. I was a fan for a long time around that time, and there was a lot more to it than just simply, well, I don't really like the content. No, him and Vince McMahon had a heated rivalry, which Bruno Sammartino in the documentary mentioned, it's all in the past, they've made up, and that's great. But I kind of feel like they could have delved a little bit more into that. And I get this was more of a tribute to Bruno Sammartino, but they made it seem like this was the most uncontroversial guy in wrestling history, and that may be true, but that doesn't mean there wasn't any controversies. He was a very clean-cut guy, very modest guy, very good role model to children, but it's not like all this never happened without a hitch. I've never seen anything really elaborating on it, and I was hoping to, of his backstage altercation with Gorilla Monsoon back in the day. Again, the first time I saw this, I remember really hoping that they would elaborate on his problems with Vince McMahon. Because like I said, as a fan growing up, we only got little tidbits here and there. Like occasionally you'd see some like news thing where they were bashing WWF, and here's Bruno Sammartino helping. I remember watching one where they had Bruno Sammartino and Vince McMahon going back and forth. There was some heat there. I really wish they would have elaborated on it. But they didn't. But I will say this, as far as what it was meant for, to be a tribute to Bruno Sammartino, it did its job. It's a good little feel-good documentary. It's just incomplete, in my opinion. But it pays homage to Bruno Sammartino, which is definitely necessary. WWE, wrestling in general, would not be where it is today without him. He was carrying that territory on his back for almost 2 decades. People criticized his actual wrestling ability. He may not have been the most scientific, technical wrestler, but he was proof. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you can go out there and do all the scientific stuff. It matters how you connect with the crowd. And he definitely connected with the crowd. He was a good role model. I will not take that away from him. But it's just like I said, they could have elaborated a little bit more on the not so flattering stuff. But we can never downplay what a superstar he really was. Personally, from my own thing, my father is not a wrestling fan. Never was. When my brother and I got into it when we were kids, he couldn't stand it. He was always trying to, I guess, talk us out of being a wrestling fan, and it just wouldn't work. We just loved it. But even he recognized Bruno Sammartino whenever he was on television. Because even growing up, hating wrestling, and he always did, he knew dang well who Bruno Sammartino was. Just like when I was growing up, whether you liked basketball or not, you knew who Michael Jordan was. That was Bruno Sammartino. The next one would be Hulk Hogan, but that's the one that started it all. Being that first wrestler to be so famous that his fame transcended wrestling. So, on that note, I definitely recommend, if you have Peacock, you have the WWE Network, go check out the 46-minute documentary of Bruno. So there you have it. That's my wrestling review this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications when I post the videos. And leave a comment I can respond to in my next comment corner. If you've seen Bruno, tell me what you thought of it. If you just want to talk about some Bruno Sammartino moments, have at it. Love you guys.